Okay, hello everyone. I think I'm going to go ahead and get started. Um, Hope you're all doing fine. Um, Make sure if you have any questions, please do not be afraid to message me at any point. All right, so I'm going to start with our little PowerPoint. Can everyone see my first screen there? Just to check. Hey, I love those thumbs up. All right. Welcome to, what week are we on? 5, 4, 5? We're on module 4, so it must be 4. All right, so welcome to module 4. We're going to go into what we call single row functions. And this is part 1 of 2, I think. But we can learn how we can manipulate data temporarily, as we select it based on what we need for a report to look like, or data that we need to retrieve, or account for any anomalies as far as data entry. That's kind of the reason. So our objectives: apply single row functions that perform case conversion and or character manipulation. Use case manipulation single row functions, lower, upper, init cap, and a SQL query. Fun stuff. Yay. Use character manipulation single row functions, concat, substring, length, instr, lpad, writepad, trim, and replace all functions that you can use to, remember, just temporarily format data or add, take away, whatever you'd like to support a report or something of that nature. And write flexible queries using substitution variables, and that's a fun thing. Substitution variables are like forms, and I'll get into that, but it's pretty interesting what you can do with that, and even with basic knowledge of SQL. All right, so why do we need this? If we need to change the way data are presented, that's probably the biggest reason. Is important. Most of the time data required. So basically, most of the time you just will not just simply pull data from your database when you're generating a report. And what most of the tools, you can do some things within your queries even to make sure it looks, even you go back to concatenation and things like that. So it's all about making sure that that report follows the criteria. So in this lesson, you'll learn various ways to transform data to match particular situations. The first thing I want to introduce you to is what we refer to as a dummy table. And basically, it's a way that you can test some of these functions without actually impacting any data. So this is the dual table, D-U-A-L. And you'll use this a lot just to run certain functions, mostly for testing. So the dual table has one row, and it's X, and has one column, which is dummy. So it is a dummy table. And it's a part of the Oracle Academy environment. So you can always run a select star from dual just to verify that. So it's used when creating a select statement and to basically test and execute functions not related to a specific table. You may think, well, why would I need to do that? Well, the biggest reason you need to, form an intuition, get a handle on using some of these functions. So queries using the dual table returns one row as a result because it only has one row. And the dual table can be useful for calculations, and that's the key, and to evaluate expressions basically not associated with the table. That's primarily why you would use it. So we're going to use the dual table a lot to test and learn many of the single row functions. And remember, functions are just kind of like embedded code that you call, if you want to think of it that way from a programming perspective. Basically, you call this function by name and it'll form an operation on particular items. Remember, there's input and output, et cetera, et cetera. based on our intro to functions last week. So the example I'm going to show you is just using the dual to execute a calculation with a select statement. So if you take a look at this, select, and then we have a division here and an addition. So select this 319 divided by 29 plus 12. And you see that the representation is this little, we show the calculation as a column, and it's 23. So 319 by 29 is 11. Those of you, and then plus 12 is 23. So something, I mean, that's pretty straightforward, but you're not going to use it as a calculator. So that just gives you an idea of what we can do with that dual table and not impact anything as far as our database. Does that make sense to everyone? So you'll see this select from dual, or yeah. Makes sense? Thumbs up? All right, I like that. All right. So now we're going to get into single row character functions, and they're divided into two categories. We have functions that convert the case, upper or lower, of character strings. Remember, this is just words or sentences, usually a single word. Functions that can join, extract, show, find, pad, and trim character strings. So, yeah, we've been exposed to one sort of, but you'll see what I mean once I get into the actual definition of these single row functions. And hopefully you remember what a single row function is. A single row function returns a single response based on the number of rows inputted. I mean, that's kind of a reminder from last week. So single row functions can be used in the select and the where and the order by clauses. Either of those places, you can have a single row function. All right. So let's get into it. Single row character functions. Case manipulation. These are functions that are important because the case, upper, lower, mix of the string, you may not even know what's in the database. So you're going to convert it so that basically no matter what's stored in the table, you can look for a specific result. So and it allows for a temporary conversion of data. It doesn't change the data in the table. It just changes it for whatever purposes you're looking for. So mismatches between the case and the character string stored in the databases and query requested are avoided. So if you don't know the case, you can use a case manipulation function. Voila, there it'll return a result without an issue. Here, and I listed these before, but here's kind of a pictorial representation of the character function. You have the case manipulation, lower, upper, init cap, and then your long list, or maybe it's a short list of character manipulation functions, and you'll see the difference between those when we go through these examples here in a second. So that's concat. Remember concat. The one thing I do want to say about concat, to give you a preview, concat has two and only two parameters. You can only concat two strings with this function. In other programming languages, it can be used beyond that, but in SQL, two parameters, and then you have substring length, INSTR, and that stands for end string, LPAD, WRITEPAD, trim, and then replace. And I said this before, temporarily convert, and this is primarily strings because this is character functions. And it's used to just format strings in the way that you need for some type of output. And as it's more of a redundant, but as you'll note, basically, while you may need a specific view of your table, etc., and you have to remember that Oracle is very case sensitive. So an uppercase V is very different than a lowercase v, etc. And so you really need to account for that. And to offer a reason behind that, since this is a part of what we want you to understand, basically we can get into ASCII and binary storage. That's why most computer systems are case sensitive. Now, if you get into something like Python programming, etc., you won't run into as many issues, but yeah. So here's our first example. We're going to use the lower function. The arguments or parameters lower, and then you have a column or an expression, and it converts alpha characters to lowercase. So no matter what's stored in that table, and as you see here, if you ran a query on the last name of Abel, let me walk through the query, sorry. So select last name from employees where lower. So we're saying the lower case of all the letters being lowercase of Abel of that last name is ABEL lowercase, but it's stored in the database as uppercase ABEL. So that's, if for some reason you're having a problem finding Abel because you're not entering it correctly, doesn't matter how it's stored if you just use that lower function now to return the correct results. Does that description make sense to everyone? Or check for understanding. Diana says yes. Justin says yes. And thank you. I love that. All right. Let's move on. Upper is just the opposite. So you can list within your select query, and the where clause here, we're just essentially indicating let's find Abel, and we're stating that the last name, all uppercase, would be listed this way. And so once again, it'll return Abel. Now, you're probably thinking, well, I mean, I should say you really don't need to know anything about, as I said before, how the data is entered. You just need to, make sure that you're indicating either upper or lower case so that your results will be, validated, excuse me. Yeah, I'm getting a text of that answer. All right. Sorry for the interruption. Let's continue. All right. A nitcap is another one. Basically, it was a newer function that came out because mostly a name is going to be uppercase first letter and then lowercase the letters that follow. So in this case, if for some reason you're sure that this function will apply to what's in your table, then yeah, you see that it's another way to ensure that your data that is returned is valid for what you're looking for. And just remember, and the one key here is that these case manipulation functions do not change the value that's in the table. It's just another way to ensure that you get the correct data that's returned. All right. So along with that, we have character. Now that was basically case for the whole, either the whole name or the whole string, but we do have character manipulation functions, and sometimes you may need to extract or change or format or even alter your character. And this is only temporarily. You're not altering a character in the table. You're altering it for the output. And I can't stress that enough. And if you did something like that, a DBA would not be happy. So one or more characters or words are passed into the function, which will perform its functionality, or the input character string and return the change or extract it or count it or whatever you're trying to do. It's just a way to format your output. I would use this all the time before some of the coding practices came about. I use this all the time to, I'm getting some questions in the chat, so let me pause to display passwords, I was going to say. So Trevor asks, data isn't always perfect. Real world data is sometimes a mess, and that is true. Sometimes you have a data entry person that doesn't care about typing and letter structure. So, and I see this all the time. They use different verbiage or vernacular. Diana asks, can you combine multiple strings in one step, if not with concat? Generally, the answer to that question at this point is no, Diana. So just speaking of concatenation, you actually, with SQL, you want to use the double pipe for concatenation and not the concat function because of its limitation. And Trevor did provide an answer for you. So I'm just following up. So thank you, Trevor. You're way ahead of me. So it's still good to know. I don't believe other flavors of SQL support doing. Yeah, other flavors do not. So you are correct. And double pipe is not considered a function. It's just a special character that the system reads as concat. And once again, Trevor's all over that. This took some time. I used to use both SQL Server. Yeah, so thank you for the conversation. So we can all learn. I just want to make sure I'm following the chat, not missing some good points that we can all learn from. All right. So that was concat. Let's get back to our lesson. And so speaking of concat, I did want to point out that concat is two values together only for that function. Remember that. The arguments are only two strings. If you have more than two strings, you want to use the double pipe. Right. And so here's the syntax for concat. It's a function, and you put either your column or your literal string in there. And this is just using the concat function with the dual table to combine hello and world. Now, you can't use concat, put hello, and then a space. Yeah, it would give you an error. Too many arguments. And here's the concat with the first name, last name, and you notice they're just bundled together without any separation. Concat is two string arguments only. Please remember that. That can create problems. I actually saw that before in one of the assignments. Someone decided to use concat and it did not work. All right. Another function for character manipulation is substr or substring. It extracts a string of determined length. So the arguments are the character string and starting position and the length. So the starting position and length are numbers, whole numbers. So the length argument is optional. This is optional. And if you don't use the length, it will return all the characters in the string to the end of the string. So if you take a look at this test of substring from using the dual table, select some string. Hello world is our string. We're going to start at position 1 and bring back 5 characters. So that's HELLO. And as you see, we have hello return. So obviously there's many usages for that. And if we perform the same function call without the length, you start at position 6, and it just returns everything from that starting point to the end of the string. So that's why we only get world here, starting at 6, which is the W. Does that make sense? That can be a little confusing, but just remember what those two arguments represent. And if we use that on a table column, so we're just bringing the first 3 letters of the last name, how they are listed in the database. And as you see, and you can think of many usages for that, as far as representation. So, and you notice the syntax, substring, the column, and then the starting position and the number of characters, right? All right, now, maybe you need to know how many characters are in a string. Well, for that particular request, you want to use the length function. And I'm going to buzz over to the chat. This was one of my favorite built-in functions. Is that substring, Trevor? Yeah, you can do a lot with it, especially if you're manipulating data in a table for outputs. So yeah, it has a lot of usages. And length, combined with length too, this is very important too. So the argument is a character string, and basically the syntax is length and then the string in parentheses, and it will return, excuse me, the length of the string. So we know that hello world has 10 characters. Okay. And if you think about it, you can do a lot with that without even knowing, without having knowledge of what's in that particular data column. Yeah, it's interesting what you can do with that and substring. I'm sure it's handy, like in all languages, but why couldn't the starting position just be 0? Well, this is a little bit different than arrays in programming language. Everything in SQL is literal, which means the one spot is the first character in your string, just to confuse you from some other programming languages. So just remember that it is not 0. So be careful with that. But thanks for pointing that out, Diana. All right, back to our lesson. And here's another example of length. So it's going to return the length of all of the last names in our employees table. And you see there's various sizes of last names. So remember, you can use it a literal string or a column. It will do the same thing. Okay. All right, another character manipulation function is instr, which loosely stands for in the string, and it finds the numeric position of a specific character within, or characters within the string. So you say characters because you can provide a substring and it will say where that substring is, and you can think that could have many usages as well. So it searches for the first occurrence of a substring within a character string and returns basically what I just said. If the substring is not found, the 0 is returned. Remember that. If it doesn't find the spot where that string, that character or substring exists, it will return a 0. So we see our syntax or example here. Select in string hello world. We're looking for the W. And it tells us that the W is at position number 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. And if we're going to use a column, so we want to see where the position of the A's, and once again, if you think about it, you can probably do a lot with this just by figuring out where. So there's no A's or remember this is lowercase A's enabled, so you get the 0. There's 1 at position 2, etc. Now the first instance of the A in Dehan is at position 5. Is it at position 4 or 5? 4, 5, 5, right? Because we have this space and that counts as a character. And so on. Does that make sense to everyone? The instr character manipulation function. Yes, no? Brandon says, I got it. All right. Some of these functions are very useful, and you can do a lot with them as you're manipulating or changing data for whatever purpose. All right. Let's move ahead. Now let's look at padding. This is always a fun way to have fun with your data. LPAD or left pad. So pad's the left side of a character string result in a right justified value. All right, that may be confusing, like what? Left side, right side. And this one is probably easier to understand once you see the example. So it does require 3 arguments: a character string, the total number of characters in the padded string once it's completed, and the character to pad with. So you can use any character, you can use any alphanumeric, but usually you're going to use something like a star or a dash. And it makes everything, if you think about it, right justified. So you're like, what is that? So if you look at this example, select LPAD hello world, and we're going to pad the entire string, the full string, 15 characters. So as you see, hello world's 10, and we added 5 little dashes. So now we're right justifying that string. And if we want to use tables, which happens often, you see that we're right justifying that to 10 characters, and we're just adding a star so that everything is pushed to the right. Does that make sense? This is called left padding. Use very often, in the world of output. And great. And you guessed it, you can right pad as well. And it left justifies. So just to remember this, when you're padding, R pad left justifies, L pad right justifies. Can be confusing, but if you take a look at the examples, we're padding it either or justifying it either to the left or to the right. And say they all are nice and aligned, which the line of padding. So remember that second argument is the number of the entire string. And if you think about it, that would make sense. All right, let's move ahead. Trim. Trim is something that's often used to maybe just clarify or make sense of particular strings or data returns, because as Trevor said before, data can sometimes be a mess, and it's going to be your job to clean it up without actually changing the data, without actually making the database administrator mad. So trim removes all specified characters from either the beginning or the end, or both, beginning and the end. I've used this quite a bit in my old database days, because you would never know if someone had, didn't know how to type or whatever. So here's the syntax. Select trim. So it's leading. So in this string that we produce, ABCDA, so if we want to remove the leading A or any number of characters, and you see the result is just BCDA. And the trailing is just that. Basically, we're asking to remove the trailing A. And now we got ABCD. And then both, just use the keyword both. And if there's an A, it will remove it. As you see, the results is just that BCD. So it's just another way of impacting either a leading character or a trailing character. And you could put a space in there or whatever to clean up your data as far as your results. Does that make sense? Does the trim function make sense? All right, great. So you don't have to memorize all these. I mean, they're very easy to find, and you'll have enough practice. So no panicking on that side. All right, and now we have the replace function. And basically, it's used to replace a sequence of characters in a string with something else. So that's the whole purpose. So here's the general syntax. So you have a string, and then the string to replace, and then the replacement string. You're like, what? Wait, what? That doesn't, I don't know. So string one is a string that will have the characters replaced. String to replace is a string that will be searched for and removed from string one. And then the replacement string is the new thing that's going to be added or inserted into string one. Can this be useful? Possibly. Maybe you discover that someone spelled someone's last name wrong, and you can't change it in the database, but you can change it on the results. So here's a kind of an odd one that came out of Oracle Academy. Basically, we have a database entry, Jack and Jew, and we want to change it to black and blue. So basically, you want to change either both of the uppercase J's with uppercase B and lowercase l. And so the results in both of those, whenever it finds a uppercase J, is going to replace it. You get the result black and blue. It's a very simple example. If for some reason you don't have a replacement or a replacement string, then it replaces it. It does not replace it; it just removes. Maybe you just want to remove, and that's kind of like the other function. But if you don't satisfy the arguments, yes, you get something like this, which you probably don't want. But just remember that it has 3 arguments. That's the key here. The string to find, the string to replace, and then the string that you're working on. And here's one. This is one of the functions that I've used many times to mask names for whatever compliance or whatever. I would use this to mask. This is way back in the old days when we did not have these complex programming languages and forms. We would use this to mask passwords. Just replace all the letters with stars. Yeah, believe it or not, that was the old way of masking. But anyway, you see here, this is just going to replace the letter A in all of the last names with a star. A simple way. Of course, you would have to mask the other names that don't have A. So that's the replace function. Pretty straightforward. All right. Can you use column aliases with functions? So all functions operate on values that are in parentheses, and each function name denotes its purpose, which is helpful to remember. So just be very careful. It's always a function, and then whatever you're processing within that function, within parentheses. So sometimes you are using column aliases, and so to answer the question, yes, you could use column aliases to basically provide an argument for a function. So here we have select lower last name, and you concatenate that with lower substring first name 1 and 1. So the first character and only 1. And we're going to call that username, right? All right. So then when we look at the results, now we actually have a username. And you can actually insert that into another table, whatever you like, and include a password. This is kind of the old way. I've actually used something similar to this to create usernames. And usernames, remember, this is last name with the first initial. And that should look somewhat familiar. It used to be the default for usernames. Let's see. All right. Gotta love, what did Trevor say? Love char 150 on the column with only 2. Yeah, now we're talking about buffers and all that stuff. But anyway, that's using an alias within a function. Okay. All right. Does that make sense for everyone? Great. All right. The last thing that we're going to cover in this section of topic or module 4, this topic for module 4 is substitution variables. Substitution variables can be useful, especially if you have a lot of unknowns and you want to have the user drive the query. I need to make sure one more individual is marked present. Okay, thank you. Checking. All right, so substitution variables. Yeah, so there's a need to run a query where you may want to have the user input several, values. So imagine you're writing a report and basically you want to handle each one department at a time or something like that. So without the use of substitution variables, you may end up writing several queries or change just to simply change the where clause. Well, this is what a substitution variable will do for you. Substitution variables, actually, it says Oracle Developer and Oracle, but substitution variables are common throughout all the RDBMSs. So the syntax is a little different, but you can see this in most of the SQL Server, MySQL, etc. So to use them, replace the hard-coded value in a where clause with this, and this is the syntax, colon, and then name of the variable. Oracle Developer will prompt for value with that simple substitution. So take a look at this query. This is the original query. As far as our example, select first name, last name, department ID from employees where department ID is equal to 10. And so we're going to get Jennifer Whalen and 10. So if we write this in a substitution variable, this is exactly what it will look like. Select first name, last name, department name from employees where department ID is equal to, and enter department ID is what you're prompting the user to do. And yes, you should follow this syntax with the underscores and all that. I think it will accept spaces, but this is generally safe for a prompt. So essentially, when you run this, it will prompt the user to input a department ID. And in this case, we're inputting the 10 and then clicking the apply, and then you'll get that result. And you can replace that with any, just run it again and replace it with another number, etc. Does that make sense to everyone? This is truly the gist of a substitution variable. Make sense? Confusing? All right. Brendan and Trevor and Diane seem to be on board. And it's just a kind of a quick and easy way to create a form. So an entry form. Yeah, and that my arrow is a little late, but that's the entry point for that query. And of course, if you enter in something that's not valid, you get no results. I have to remember that. Yeah, I just went through that. Substitution variables are treated as strings, which means when passing a character or date, single quotes are not needed. So basically, this is saying that you don't have to include the single quotes in the prompt value. So here we just enter in King with the select star from employees where last name, enter last name, and we get all of the information about King. King, whoops, and apply, voila. So that can be useful if you want this, you want to substitute, and if you know your programming language, you know about variables, and they just hold values that can be changed, and that's essentially where it gets its name from. All right. I know that was a lot, but once again, you don't have to memorize any of that. Most of the functions, like lower, upper, concat, you'll get an intuition about how they're used and when to use them if necessary. All right, so our terminology for this topic, we have a lot. Character functions, concat, dual, expression, format, initcap, input, output, instr, instring, length, lower, upper, lpad, rpad, replace, and single row functions, which is all of those. Substring and in-string and trim and substitution variable. Phew. So yeah, if you can grasp all of that, you're really in good shape. Diana, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question with which one was it? It capitalized the first character. I think it's
Unit cap.
yeah, and okay, I was like, I didn't see that here. But if you have a string that's like two words or like multiple words and it has spaces, does it capitalize the first character of each word or just the very first?
The very first word. That's a very good question.
Okay,
Uh,
thanks.
because generally, like things like names, you rarely see a string with a space in it because of the way these single row functions work. So yes, it'll only capitalize the first word because it thinks of the space as a part of that string. Good question. I like that. And you're right. I didn't put unit cap in here, did I? Oh yeah, that's right there. It's in there.
There were a lot.
All right. All right. Let's go on to section 4.2 of module 4. And now we're going into number functions. We just had string functions and character functions, all that. And so now we can actually work with numbers. So we're going to apply single row to numbers, round, trunk, and mod. Ooh, who knows what mod is? Something about a remainder, right? We'll talk about that. And distinguish between trunk and round, which is, it can be problematic because they seem like they do the same thing, and we all know that they don't, right? They do not do the same thing. One just cuts off values, the other will round it up or round it down based on the rules. So you'll see that. So please remember that. They do not do the same thing. And it states the implications of applying these well, basically, this is reinforcing the fact that there is some confusion about how these work. So we need to make that very clear. All right. So of course we have to have a purpose or a reason why we teach you this. So one of the reasons we put money in the bank is to take advantage of interest. Well, I guess one of the reasons some of us don't have the luxury, or at least we don't think we have the luxury. But anyway, we often do other things, but I digress. Banks adjust the interest rate with various economic indicators such as inflation, blah, 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 and stock market. We all know that. Typically, and maybe this is applicable 30 years ago. No, I don't know. Interest rates are expressed as a percentage like 3.45%. Well, I was just looking at the actual rate. If the bank decided to round the percentage to 3.5%, would it be to your advantage? And there was a case a few years ago, well, maybe many years ago, where the bank was saying one thing and performing a different calculation, and millions of dollars were lost, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, we're not going to get into that. But so, or if the bank decided to drop the decimal, basically drop the decimal values and calculate the interest at 3%, would you be happy and wouldn't be happy? Because they're telling you 3.5 and then all of a sudden they're, yeah. Neither of those, you have to be very careful of, what's happening to your funds. Rounding and truncating numbers, they do play an important role and in business, and it sometimes ensures that the processes are easily understood, but once again, someone has to be in control of what happens to these calculations. All right, that being said, let's move on. So there are count them, three number functions. For us, there's more, but for us, we're going to stick with the three: round, trunk, and mod. I mentioned that before, but these are the ones that we will be working with. A round is can be used with numbers and dates. It is mainly used to round numbers to a specific decimal place or to specific decimal places. The syntax is round, and then your column or your expression, and then your number of decimal places. So I know I had these up ahead of time, but see here, select round 45.926 from dual. So if you don't have the number of decimal places, it rounds it to the whole number. I didn't make that clear. I think that I have that in the speaker notes. Yes, if you don't have a number of decimal places, it will round it to the whole number. And that's the same as 0. Yeah, I do make a note of that. Does that make sense? Check for understanding. Hopefully I didn't confuse you too much by putting that ahead of the explanation. So the arguments are column or expressioner and number of decimal places. So, all right, let me ask you this before I show you this. If I put a number 2 here, select round 45.926, 2, what would be the result?
45.93.
You answered a question with a question.
Yeah.
So 45, that is correct. 45.93. Does everyone know why it's 93? There's a general rule for rounding, right? If it's more than 5, up. If it's less than 5. But anyway, that is correct. 45.93. And if you don't believe me, please run this in the developer. All right. Oh, see, I knew I had that somewhere. So, all right, another aspect of rounding that you probably didn't know, if the number is negative, the number is rounded to that number of decimal places to the left of the decimal point, to the left. So if you put a -1 here, it's going to round all of this to the next highest number. One decimal place to the left. So since this is two digits, it's going to round it to the next 2-digit number. Right. Does that make sense to everyone? I sometimes confuse myself when I think about how that works with the negative. Right. I'm glad you all understand. You all can teach me the whole. So this be rounded up to 50 just because it's a negative. That's, remember, the traditional round is the number of decimal places to the right. All right, got through that. All right, that's round in a nutshell. And round can be a little confusing, but just remember, positive number, right of the decimal, negative number, left of the decimal. Now, trunk or truncate. Trunk can be used with numbers or dates, and the same idea is mainly used to terminate, cut off an expression of value to a specific number of decimal places. So you take a look at this using trunk, our same number, 45.926, they're just going to truncate that to 2 decimal places to the right. When you see it doesn't round, that's very different than the other response, right? Where it's 45.93, this is 45.92, because we're truncating it to 2 decimal places. And I do want to make sure everyone sees the difference between that and round. All right. So if the number of decimal places is not specified or is 0, like round, the number defaults to 0. So basically, do I run that? Yeah. So it just takes, if you have a 0 or nothing there, then it basically truncates everything to that number, all the decimal. Okay. Those 2 examples there. So that's truncating. And it simply terminates at a given point. Basically, throws everything else away if you have a 0. All right. Okay, before I move from truncate, does everyone have a pretty good tuition of the differences between the 2, round and trunk? And I'm going to further expand that, but I want to make sure that I have a good footing for us to move ahead to our next number function. All right, great. Okay, mod. You've probably seen mod to some extent, definitely in math somewhere. So the mod function finds the remainder after one number is divided by another. And you're probably thinking, what? Why? If you know anything about programming, this, I'm talking about odds and evens and all these other usages. This is where the mod function, even from the old binary days, this is where the mod function came from. So for example, mod of 5 divided by 2 is 1 because 2 does not go into divide into 5 equally. There's a remainder of 1. Believe me, it does kind of make sense. It's just another way, and there's a use case for this. It's another function that we can use to identify other, items that we can calculate, etc. So the biggest usage, I mentioned this before, is it's just simply to determine if a number is odd or even. If the number can be divided by 2 with no remainder, then it's even, etc. For example, if mod of x divided by 2 is 0, then x is an even number. So if we wanted to find out something like, here we're looking at the number, what am I doing here? Select country name, mod airports 2 as mod demo from WF countries where airports is not null. And so the mod demo here will show if the number of airports for each country is odd or even. So 1 means it's odd. I mean, would you use this? You probably just want to know the number of airports. You don't want to know if it's 1 or 15. That's an odd use case, but the 1, as you know, says that there's an odd number. The 0 says that there's an even number. Whoopee. All right, but that's one of the usages of odd. This is an odd use case, but pun intended. But that's what you would want to use mod for. It's a very simple function. And I'll tell you that its primary use is to determine whether a number is odd or even. I've never seen it used. Well, I have seen it used in different ways, but that's probably the primary use. Any questions or comments about that? That very useful function. No, everyone's like, why do we even need to know this? Well, you never know. Some mathematician may come up and say, can you, anyway. All right, our terminology for our number functions. Topic is number functions, mod, round, and trunc. That was a lot less tasking than the character and the string functions, right? Well, we still have to get through date functions. And you see that it's very similar in many ways as number functions. But all right, so we're going to take a look at what the sysdate is and other date functions. The sysdate is a lot of fun. State the implications to global businesses to manipulate dates stored in the date format. So that's pretty simple objectives. So have you ever wondered how many days left in the semester? We can't be thinking about that now. It's too early, right? Well, you can use your calendar, your sysdate, or many ways to calculate that. And how many days before graduation? Because the Oracle database stores dates as numbers, calculations can be easily performed using addition, subtraction, and other mathematical operators. Yeah, so that just means that the date, I mean, you look at a date format, it is actually stored as a number in the database, and that's pretty common. All right. Trevor, did you have a comment, or is that just a non-comment with us? Just checking the chat. I guess that means businesses do depend on date functions, and essentially calendar and date functions are important. It runs a lot of things. I mean, as far as what's orders, shipments, years of service, many aspects. So it's your job to make sure you understand all the date is important and the functions that are associated with it. Okay, displaying dates. Our default date format is day, month, the 3-letter month. That's what the MON stands for. And then year. There was a time, we're far enough in the 21st century that we're so worried, those of us that were around during the whole Y2K scare, that you had to change everything to a 4-digit year because the computers would not know what to do when it went from 1999 to 2000. They would just see 00 and think we're back in the Stone Age. So, but that's all past now. So most of the database systems will just have a 2-digit year again, like it was in the old days when I started. So if you do a sysdate, which is essentially your system date, you can run this in developer. I ran this last year. Wow, there's long ago. I'll have to update. You'll get the month, the day, 3-letter month, and then it's Christmas Eve. Anyway, all right. As I said, it actually stores the date all the way down, actually even lower than the second. It's an epoch date, and it can go down to microsecond and maybe even further down in some systems. But so you can differentiate very accurately dates. So, and the range right now, I think it's even further. No, it does go to 9999 AD and 4712 BC as far as the range that you can use for whatever purpose, in the Oracle database. All right. Okay, sysdate, once again, that's your system, your functional or your date that's recorded by your server or by your system. It is probably the most accurate, indication of date, based on your computer operations. So, and I showed you that query. Even though the default display is a 2-digit year, the century year is stored. It does actually store the 4-digit year. Just remember that. As I said before, it's not such a big thing anymore. Everyone's like, well, we know it's 2025 and not 1925. So here's some examples working with date. I'll throw out at you. So the first one, select last name, hire date plus 60. I'm just going to add 60 days to that employer hire date. So that may be a probationary period or whatever you want to call it. But you see, it just simply adds 60 days or basically 2 months. Then the second example, select last name, hire date, trunk. Oh, here we go. Look out. I'm going to talk about this in a second. So trunk and round, sysdate divided by 7, divided by 52. And basically, because I only use this calculation because these are actual Oracle employees, believe it or not, in case you didn't figure that out. So I was just going to see if they were still working for Oracle today, and this was like last year, how many years, and many of them do not work for, King is long gone for Oracle anymore. Although I would be surprised, some of them may, if you're curious, you can Google. So that complex query, the trunk and round, was just to come up with this simple 2-digit number. And so the sysdate is essentially a day. So that's why we're divided by 7. And, ensuring that if you want to break down that calculation, it will match the number of years. So that's all I did there. And that's a very relatively sophisticated way to extract that data, but I think I came up with that because nothing else worked simply. But this is just to show you that you can use those functions, and I will expand on explanation of trunk and round as it's opposed to dates. It's very similar to numbers. Here's another example. What I'm doing here is selecting the employee ID and then round end date and start date divided by 365, which is the number of days in a year. I'm rounding it to 2 digits, and we're going to call this tenure in your last, how many years you worked in your last job. So remember that the arguments for round is your date, and then basically what you're rounding it to. And essentially that's not necessarily a date. We're actually using a number here, because this will be a number, and we're going to divide it by 365 to get a date. And we're just having to play. And this is just like looking at job history. In essence, what I was trying to do was to give you an idea how you can display the number of years of last job. All right. So that I threw some examples at you just to get you thinking a little bit. But let me go back and explain some of the date functions that you can use along with round and trunc. There's months between, there are a number of months between 2 dates. Add months, you can add calendar months to a date. Next day, that's the date of the next occurrence of the day of the week specified, like the next day of Saturday, etc. Last day is just the last day of the month, and then you have round and truncate. Let's take a look at these. So months between takes 2 date arguments and returns the number of calendar months between the 2 dates. Take a look at the example here. Select last name, hire date from employees where months between cis date, and because the cis date here was 10 years in the future, which is why I minused it. You're probably wondering, what is he doing? I'm subtracting the 3,650 days because this is 2024, and this currently the table goes back to King and Kokar and all them. So I wanted to see the number of days basically using the cis date and their hire date. And if they were basically greater than 240, I think that was the parameter that I was looking for. But to explain, yes, that's what I would normally use if I was back in 1987 or 1990 or whatever. Just the cis date and hire date, and see the differences between the months of the date, the current date, and then when they were hired. And basically, if they were more than 240 days, and that was just an arbitrary number. So the gist here, you could perform calculations like this. I was trying to simplify that some, but it's really hard because of the dates stored in the database are so old to get a gist of what, the usefulness of data coming out of that. Does that make sense? Another check for understanding here. Why I did perform this query that way. Okay, great. Yeah, you have to be creative because of the date that's in the database. So add months will take 2 arguments, a date and a number, returns the date value with the number of months added to the original date. If a negative number is supplied, the function will subtract that number of months. So select add months, cis date 12. So basically, I ran this on December 25th, I guess, Christmas Day. No, December 22nd last year. And we wanted to add 12 months to December 22nd last year. And yes, we get December 22nd this year. So you're just adding 12 months to the cis date. Okay. And that's the add month function. All right, next day takes 2 arguments. A date and a day of the week, and returns the next occurrence of that day of the week, basically. So next day, cis date. So we want to know the next Saturday last year. The next Saturday of the week was that 28th of December in 24. Yeah, that's 28 December 24. Okay, just makes occurrence of that day of the week. So obviously, this string has to be a valid day of the week. All right. Okay. All right, last day takes a date argument and returns the last day of the month. Simple as that. So select last day, sys date, and basically last year, the last day of the month of December was the 31st of December. Easy enough. And you can think of some usage of that, you know, 8 days or whatever. All right. Now round takes two arguments, just the same as the number round. So returns a date rounded to the unit specified by the second argument. So there's the difference. So select hire date round. We're going to round hire date to the month for employees where department ID is 50. So the hire date for the first employee was 16 November 99. So it's going to round it to the month. So basically the next month. So it rounds it to the 1st of December 99. And 17 October 95, the first. So because simple rules of rounding, right? If it's more than half, then it rounds up. If it's less than half, it's going to round down. The round down, as you see with 9 July 98, it rounds it down to 1 July 98. Now, does that round example make sense to everyone? You need to make sure. All right, because this can get a little confusing. Remember, the specifier was what, creates the rounding. And hence, this second example is select hire date, round hire date to the year. So you see here, November 99 is rounded to the next year because it's past July or June, whatever it is. So 2000 and so on. And since all of these, except for March is the third month, it rounds back to January 98. And January 2, so that rounds back. October rounds up, November rounds up, July rounds up. So this is your unit specifier. You can round to the day, the month, and the year. Okay. Now trunc, as with the numbers, can be a little tasking. It takes two arguments. You have a specifier, but what it does, it returns a date truncated to the unit specified by the second argument. So here, our same example, we're going to trunc hire date to the month. So it doesn't matter. It's not rounding up or down. It's just truncating it to the month. So these are all going to go back to the 1st of the month, every single one of them, because that's the truncate. And that's, hopefully you can see the difference. This is not going to December. This is not going to November, etc. They're just truncating to the month. All right. And the same with the year. It's just truncating to the year. Doesn't matter the position of the month. It's always going to be that year, 98, 98, etc. Now, does that make sense? Because that can drive you a little nuts if for some reason your result doesn't match what you're expecting. Right. And that's one of the trickier things with truncate and round in our date. Now here's, I wanted to throw another one of these relatively complicated queries. And you can review this when I post it. But if you take a look at this query, select employee ID hire date, and I'm using that same query because of the extensiveness or the departure from the date at 3,650 as tenure, add months, hire date 6 months. So basically that's when they will have their review. Next day, their hire date Friday, last day hire date from employees where months between cis date. So basically I want to get employee ID, hire date, tenure when they had their review, and then when they were their next day, next Friday, in that cycle, and then essentially, I think the last day of basically that month that they were hired. There you go. How about confusing the heck out of you with that? So that's just essentially, you can read through this. It's just you can use multiple date functions, or well, you can use multiple functions in any of these data types. But it's just a way to generate something that may be useful for another, report or whatever. That's primarily why I did that. So make sure you review that and understand the outputs more than just walking through the query to make sure you understand. I only use round here. I should because it's probably more appropriate. But months between, cis date. Make sure you understand the functions. When the functions are blue, for your essentially your main functions. But months between is a date specific function. And if you type that into the SQL developer, it will come across that way. Okay. All right. I know that's a lot to absorb, but I have faith in you all. You should do well. So let's look at our terminology for date functions: add months, last day, months between, next day, and cis date, and round and trunk for date functions. All right. So that's it for, remember, I will post that here along with the video. Let's go ahead and walk through. Module 4 is a little different, but don't panic. It's not anything crazy. So we have our videos. All are appropriate. All will expand somewhat on what I've said. There's other functions that will be highlighted. Please review those. And once again, please understand the difference between round and trunk. That will definitely help you through the exercises. All right, the practice queries, always good, always useful. Please do not overlook these. These will practice is always very good, especially when you can see these queries run successfully in the developer. So copy, paste, run as many as you like or as few as you like, that's fine. All right, and then I put on a function chart, just kind of a simple reference so you can see what functions go with what. The character functions, the number functions, there's only 3 of them, remember, the date functions, and then there's the conversion functions, and then way back, we had our general functions that you probably forgot, mostly handling null. But here you go. Here's a list of functions, and you don't have to memorize them, but I would understand how each of them work. Take it, print it out, read through it. That's for your own kind of, practice. That's very useful when we get to the midterm. I'll just give you fair warning. All right, so then we have our practice and solutions, as usual, objectives and try it, solve it. A good way to practice for the assignment. And yes, there are 3 matching each type of single row function. So please go through those. All good stuff. I'm using my SQL developer today. Remember, yeah, practice and solutions all nice and placed together so you can check your answers, or maybe you just read through the solutions. I know after a while you probably just read through the solutions and say, I got it, and then go on to the assignment. All right, for module 4, there are 2 assignments. Once again, it's not a big deal. The first assignment is pretty simple. Basically, I'm having you run a couple of concats and some character manipulation functions. Very, very straightforward. There's only 5 in that, so that shouldn't take you long. And yes, I broke them up for from character functions. And then the second assignment is just the number functions. Where are we? I thought I had both date then. So it's just number functions for the second assignment. Oh, no, there's a date function in there as well. So yes, there's 2 assignments, module 4, assignment 1, assignment 2. Please don't forget that there's 2 assignments, and yes, it's a quiz too. That will cover all of your topics, case character manipulation, number functions, and date functions. And that's it. Piece of cake, right? Not a problem. And then we go on to module 5. All right. Okay. With that being said, any questions, concerns, or any comments? You're all very participatory and engaging. I appreciate it. We'll go into single role functions part 2, a little bit different next week, or more functions next week. Other than that, once again, please message me if you have any inquiries, and I will see you all next week. Love the thumbs up. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care.